Hello, hello. All right, put in the chat where you're zooming in from. So first, housekeeping. If you haven't already, please mute your mic. And with LGBTQ folks, I feel like I never have to say this because we are always respectful and kind, but just in case there needs to be a reminder. And then when we get to the Q&A piece, which is the most important aspect, because ultimately that's why I'm here, is to answer your questions. Just keep them brief because there may be a lot. So for the agenda and what we're going to cover, first and foremost, what is marriage? Why did we fight for it? What does it mean in this country? The power of estate planning, and then translate the Muñoz case into plain English and how it impacts everyone, LGBTQ folks and marginalized families, where Obergefell stands, and the Respect for Marriage Act, and how that plays into all of this, and then what's to come potentially. So who I am, you know me, I'm me. I rappel down buildings and rainbow flags. All right. Now, what is marriage legally? So there are in this country, and I say this country because that is not the case in all countries, there are 1,138 state and federal privileges tied to the institution of marriage. So that is what we got married for. Yes, love and all the things, but you can love one another without necessarily getting legally married. Those 1,138 state and federal privileges are financially significant, fiscally advantageous. That's why back in the day, the lavender marriages of the 70s and 80s, where folks, LGBTQ folks, would just get married. You marry your husband, your gay best friend. You go do you, I'll do me. But ultimately, we get to benefit from these 1,138 privileges. Now, I've said privilege about 9 times since we've started, and there is zero power inherent in marriage. And so in all my meetings, I like to start with discerning the difference between estate planning and marriage. Because again, with marriage comes privilege, but only with estate planning comes power. And why we fought for marriage equality. So before I get into that, so it legitimized our families under the law, secured access to critical benefits, and ultimately, legally, we went from being legal strangers to one another to legal next of kin. And now, when I say the 1,138 state and federal privileges, there are a lot of random ones. Like if you were the vice president, your spouse could ride on the Air Force Two or whatever their plane is called for free. So some of them are super dumb and would never impact, but these are the big 5 that impact everybody. Okay, so again, marriage equals privilege, not power. And I got passionate around this topic with the Terry Schiavo case. 20 years ago, straight married cis couple. He was not her healthcare power of attorney. She did not have a living will. They had no estate planning documents. Despite being her husband, he had no more power over his wife's body than the mother. So they had to duke it out in litigation. And he testified that she said, I will haunt you until the day you die if I languish on life support. And unfortunately, he went bankrupt after 8 years, and she languished on life support for 15 years. From 1990 to 2005, there was actually a documentary on Netflix this year commemorating the 20-year marking of her passing. But this, I mean, 20 years ago, straight married cis couple could not effectuate the wishes that they had for one another because they were not in writing. Okay, so everybody needs these documents. Everybody, gay or straight, right? But I have a lot of estate planning attorneys who ask me why do your gay married folks have 9 documents and my straight married folks have 5 documents? What's the difference between being gay married and straight married? Isn't married, right? And the answer is no, not really, because our marriages are only considered legal in 37 countries, potentially soon to be 36 out of 195 that fly a flag. Chances are you hop on a plane today, you end up somewhere where you are not considered legally married. I think what made me very well positioned for this moment in time is 10 years ago when we got marriage equality, I never stopped treating you as an unmarried couple. To this day, I view all of my LGBTQ folks as inherently unmarried because globally, statistically, on the whole, I say that being Canadian. There are four rights tied to the institution. I come from a long line of straight people that never got married, except my mom and my American dad, and so and there you have it. But ultimately, in Canada, after 2 years of filing your taxes, you check a box, and you get all of those privileges. So very, very, very important to discern and know the difference. That yes, we deserve them both: marriage and privilege, or privilege, marriage rather, and power. But if I were told I was going to an island tonight and could only take one thing with me, privilege or power, I would choose power time and again. Okay. All right, this little troll. I can't. Thankfully, this is not the face that takes down marriage equality. So, yay for that. That would have sucked. So, Kim Davis, why it was never a good challenge, why it was never going to be the case that why it was never going to be the case that was going to take down marriage equality are these main reasons. So, first and foremost, the Supreme Court of the United States settles disputes among courts. There was zero dispute with this. There was zero circuit split. She lost every single step of the way. She never won one thing along her entire, I mean, she didn't have to pay for her legal fees because it was the Alliance Defense Fund, which Southern Poverty Law Center has deemed a hate group. So that's who funded her this whole 10 years. And then with less than 1% of petitions being granted, there was no way, in my opinion. And the main reason is the case was about damages. It was about damages. She owed $360,000 and she didn't want to have to pay it. And she, appealed it all the way up to the top. But then due to PR and other things, made it about marriage equality. But the Supreme Court can't hear what's not in front of them. And despite how they tried to frame it from a PR and marketing perspective, at the end of the day, it was a case about damages. And what's happening right now? These things are happening right now. Just a few months ago, a judge in Syracuse refused to perform a same-sex marriage. There was a grand jury investigation into it. Multiple organizations called for her resignation, and absolutely nothing happened. And we're seeing this all across red states. So just a couple of weeks ago, Texas, right, knowing that the Supreme Court was about to decide on the Kim Davis case, I feel like that's why they amended their Texas Code of Judicial Conduct then, just again to bring it to the national forefront. But the stage is set for future litigation, regardless of the Muñoz case. Okay, we'll talk about the Muñoz case, but regardless of the Muñoz case, the stage is set for future litigation around religious exemptions in particular, and state actors against the Department of Justice and the Respect for Marriage Act. Again, I know there's supposed to be a separation between church and state, right? But what we're going to see moving forward, in my opinion, the next 10, 20 years of litigation is all going to be about where Rand Paul's First Amendment right to religious freedom begins and ends, and our Fifth and 14th Amendment begin and end. How do those coexist in society, in commerce, through court systems? So in Tennessee, there's been a law for over a year where both clerks, like Kim Davis, the Kim Davises of Tennessee, can absolutely do what she did, what she went to jail for. In Tennessee, she would not have gone to jail. And that was just passed last year. This is going to be litigated as soon as someone is denied. The issue in New York, I feel like the reason why it wasn't litigated is she delegated it to someone, so that couple got married that day. Right? So then there was a grand jury, the Kim Davis issue, the small town in Kentucky, nobody could get married. She was it. She was, lo and behold, the only person, and she was refusing. So, and so local officials refusing service, potential test cases emerging. All right, the Muñoz case. So I actually reached out to Sandra Muñoz, and she got back to me, and she is open to having a dialogue. She's a lawyer. She's an employment discrimination, pretty badass attorney, ultimately. And that's why she took this all the way up, because it's discrimination at the end of the day, what happened to them. And so yeah, she had read the one article that I found on it. And she's going to look at it through a legal lens. And I may have her on the next LQA in 2 weeks and interview her around it, and or I'll record our conversation and sort of podcast interview style, but depending on whatever she's comfortable with. So but again, so Sandra Munoz's husband was denied an immigrant visa on vague security grounds. So then she sued and said that the denial burdened her right to marry and live with her spouse in the US, and the vagueness. Okay, and that's important. And then in June of last year, so about 18 months or so ago, Department of State v. Muñoz was issued, and ultimately the Supreme Court held that a citizen, while Sandra has the fundamental right to marriage, that does not mean that she had the fundamental liberty interest to cohabitate with her non-citizen spouse. And so ultimately no fundamental due process. So there was also a due process issue where she wasn't told why. It was vague. And this is really important because Gorsuch wrote a concurring opinion where he, shockingly, where he sort of scolded the majority and saying we never should have taken this case. This was a complete stretch. The Supreme Court took this case in order, in my opinion, to have precedent to start chipping away at Obergefell. Even the dissent, all three dissents, how did you make this about marriage equality? Right? And so 6 months or so prior to the Supreme Court taking this case, the government ended up telling her, so one of her claims was, you never even told me. No due process. You never even told me why my spouse was removed. I am entitled at least to that. And they ended up telling her it was due to a tattoo, a suspicious tattoo gang relation and whatnot. And but prior to the Supreme Court taking it, she got her answer, ultimately rendering this moot. There was no more issue. And even Gorsuch said we overstretched. This was moot. We never should have taken it. So again, what did SCOTUS hold? Bottom line, the Constitution protects the right to marry, but not a right to have your spouse live here. It's crazy. Amy Coney Barrett, a lot of folks don't know, but has adopted all 4 of her children from around the world. And what if we said you have the fundamental right to be a parent, but not necessarily live with them, live with your children, right? Like, so one of the big things that Obergefell did, the second bullet point, Obergefell framed marriage as a bundle, that 1,138. The Supreme Court framed marriage as a bundle of rights and privileges. And so this is the beginning again. This is the first time that we're seeing a demarcation of, no, it's not a bundle. We can actually parse it, right? So the blueprint, they say marriage is fundamental in theory and then whittle away at the privileges in practice. Then goes against what Obergefell said at its core, which is that marriage is a bundle of privileges. And then the Glucksberg. Bum, bum, bum. So what does that mean? It's basically the legal theory that they used in Dobbs to overturn Roe v. Wade, entrenched in history and tradition. So Glucksberg came out again in this case, which tells, again, why this case matters far beyond immigration. And so if you can narrowly define a right, then require it to have deep roots in history, then you can say it doesn't exist, and then therefore not ultimately there's no fundamental right in that. So Gorsuch, the majority chose a broad holding on marriage over a narrow one on procedure, and they just should not have. And then paper rights versus lived rights, the actual ramification of this, what it means for folks from a cohabitation standpoint, from a family planning standpoint, prior to marriage equality, how many states had bans on adoption, right? So blocking a spouse burdens marriage in practice, ultimately. And then signals that, not warning, warning that adjacent rights are at risk if narrowly defined. And then Obergefell rejected what the majority does. These are some quotes. Obergefell rejected what the majority did here today as inconsistent with the approach this court has used in discussing the fundamental rights of marriage and intimacy. Same-sex couples may be forced to relocate to countries that do not recognize same-sex marriage or even those that criminalize homosexuality. This burden will fall most heavily on same-sex couples who lack the ability to make a home in the non-citizen spouse country. So, Respect for Marriage Act. A lot of folks, I'll scroll back. A lot of folks are asking me, how does this square with the Respect for Marriage Act? Aren't we good because we have the Respect for Marriage Act? What the Respect for Marriage Act does is it repealed DOMA. It enshrined marriage equality for federal purposes, federal law, and provided additional marriage protections at the state level. It does not constitutionalize the privileges. They call it incidents, which is weird, but just see privilege. It does not constitutionalize the privileges inherent in marriage, and it does not eliminate First Amendment defenses. So the only reason the Respect for Marriage Act passed within 3 days after Roe v. Wade fell, with over 91 out of 100 folks voting for it, was there were massive religious exemptions that you could drive a car through, and that we have not yet litigated because the Respect for Marriage Act will only become important if something happens to Obergefell. Obergefell is a law of the land right now. It was enacted preemptively so that, because they said, we see the writing on the wall, we see you coming for marriage equality, so we're going to enact the Respect for Marriage Act that says, at least from a federal perspective, they will have all the rights and benefits that flow from the federal government and full faith and credit. So you think Respect for Marriage Act, you think recognition. Very different than having the privileges. So you're recognized as married. I recognize you as married. You are married. But then have we whittled away at the 1,138 state and federal privileges tied to the institution of marriage? That is the difference between recognition versus, we'll say, privilege instead of incidents, and what I see as the new battleground. And then, of course, exemptions, which we've been seeing over the last couple of years, but they have yet to be litigated head on as it relates to marriage equality. And I really think, from, Tennessee's perspective, okay, Respect for Marriage Act, federal government, don't tell me what to do. I'm a state. You can't tell me what to do. So we haven't yet fully litigated those. So where we'll see pressure next, obviously more immigration issues, administrative due process, expressive vendors, so services as speech and religion, the 303 creative case where a web designer said, I don't want to use my creative artistic ability for that purpose that I don't believe in to do this person's wedding registry website, right? And then wedding cake and wedding dresses and sort of, all the things. So what's on the horizon? Muñoz, the methodology, the jurisprudential decision-making in it being exported beyond immigration. So, the analogy that I use for a marriage is, imagine this is your marriage, and these are the 1,138 state and federal privileges tied to marriage. And this is not a pen, it's a steak knife. Okay, so this is a steak knife, and it has 1,138 serrated edges to it. These are the federal benefits to it. These are the state, right? If we lose the federal, then we have, like a steak knife with 432 serrated edges. Then you're in Tennessee or Georgia or Florida, and Obergefell falls, and then you have, but guess what? Nobody can take away your butter knife. You go from the Cutco of all steak knives. All right, 1,138 state or serrated edges to your Cutco of all steak knives. And nobody, due to recognition from the Respect for Marriage Act, nobody can take away your knife. But do you have a steak knife or do you have a butter knife? But at the end of the day, nobody can take away your knife. That is a difference between recognition and the privileges inherent in being recognized as married. And so what's on the horizon? More expansion of these 303 creative cases, Respect for Marriage Act enforcement tests, and or just states like the Tennessee, especially the Tennessee one, because In Texas, judges never had to marry anyone. So again, that was a total PR stunt in right at the cusp of the Supreme Court announcing whether they were going to take the Kim Davis opinion. I view that as just a complete PR stunt because judges in Texas never had to marry anyone. They just amended the judicial code to make it clear, but they never had to. It's always been a choice ultimately. But in Connecticut, or I'm sorry, in Tennessee, they are now allowing the Kim Davises of the world to not fulfill their job, to not fulfill their ministerial duty, which is their whole job is to issue marriage certificates, and they can religiously exempt. So, all right. So, what are some real life scenarios? What could actually happen out there in the next several years that will bring about lawsuits? Say you're at the DMV and the clerk refuses to update your driver's license because you were married in Colorado, but you live in Tennessee and you're same sex. And they're like, nope, don't want to do it. And so again, then it would be a challenge or filing under the Respect for Marriage Act. State employee benefits blocked. The state university won't add your spouse to their health plan. State court clerk, like Tennessee's Kim Davis version, declines to issue routine order, name change, whatnot, based on marital status. So again, just some concepts, ideas on real life scenarios. So again, my thought is not a massive overturning of Obergefell, but instead a slow erosion of Obergefell. That's what I see happening. I mean, Heritage Foundation, Project 2025 folks, they gave themselves 50 years to overturn Roe v. Wade. That was their plan, and it took literally 50 years. They are patient, right? So, and moving forward, we have Muñoz, the first cut. And then we have state legislation, we have lower courts, we have future SCOTUS cases. And then potentially 10 years down the line, a Kim Davis is no longer considered a lawbreaker. In Tennessee, she's not. What she did is completely legal right as of right now in Tennessee. My favorite movie, Devil Wears Prada. Love when you move at a glacial pace. So the law is glacial. But you don't have to. So what are some things you can do? Again, I started out with estate planning because estate planning is what we've been using for 50 years, for decades rather, to recreate marriages. And again, inherently, globally, statistically, on the whole, you are considered unmarried in this world. Only 37 countries out of 195. So I have these travel cards that I usually have on me, and just having all of that documentation, everybody needs it, gay, straight, but just making sure we need it even more. And then stay in community, do things like this. This is how we're going to get through this, not just this, but everything else that's happening politically and around the world. So staying in community, staying visible, engage, vote, be political, and then educate and share. Everybody can do their part, even if your platform is your kitchen table with 6 people, 4 people around it. Those are 4 more people that would have heard about this. I will be emailing this out to everyone who registered. And again, not proprietary on anything. Please share. And November 25th will be the next one. Let me stop my share. All right. Who's got a question? I recommend, so I'm going to answer the question in the chat. And then raise your hand on the thing instead of just unmuting yourself, and or put in the chat. And Jen, who's here, is compiling questions. So the main reason has nothing to do with this, but let me scroll all the way down. The main reason I don't recommend right now legally changing your name is the SAVE Act. So and again, they don't envision it passing in the Senate, but he issued an executive order that says the exact same thing, right? So everyone's looking over here at the SAVE Act. Well, meanwhile, over here, he issued an executive order saying the exact same thing. So just for the next year or so, until that litigation is fully figured out and we know what additional documentation one would need to be able to bring, because you change your name. I was out with straight woman the other day, and she just recently got married, and I was like, did you change your name on your birth certificate? She's like, no. Like, who does that? Like, nobody does that. 84% of American women are impacted by that. So just in general, changing name by way of marriage. But if you're on it and you have all of that documentation that you would potentially need, then great. I'm a huge proponent of I meet you where you're at. And as long as it's not the day before the election and you're like, oh shit, I need to order my birth certificate. And that takes 12 weeks and you can't vote. Right. So as long as you have all the documentation and you're good to go from a voting perspective, then truly, that's my main concern. My wife and I recently moved from Florida to Maryland. We had a trust and other documents. Are those good? No, they are not. It's a very good question. One of the biggest, 400 years ago, when the laws around this were created, they didn't think our horse and buggy could get from Florida to Maryland. Okay, so the laws are just super archaic around and just not aligned with the mobile and global world that we now live in. So unfortunately, at a minimum, the two documents that always need to be updated for the state in which you now live is the will and the trust, right? Because again, the states don't speak to each other, so you can't hand a Florida document to a Maryland court. They speak two different languages. One speaks Florida, the other one speaks Maryland. So Maryland's not taking that document. So if we wanted your wishes and your will and trust to govern, we'd have to send that to Florida. So the whole goal of proper estate planning, and we'll be having a webinar in December on just LGBTQ estate planning. So this is just high level macro for right now, but the goal of estate planning is probate avoidance. All right, and we'll talk more about why probate sucks and why we want to avoid it in December, but ultimately that is the goal of estate planning. Now, if something happens to you in Maryland, but you don't have Maryland documents, now we're going to have to probate, because you had Florida ones. We'll have to probate you in Maryland and then do an ancillary probate to Florida where the documents, do exist. So, and then the other documents, the durable power of attorney, if you're coming from a state with stricter, which I can tell you Florida is not stricter than Maryland, but it all depends on what state. And so if the state you're moving to has stricter statutes, especially around the durable power of attorney, then you'd have to update those. Otherwise, all of the documents are intended to be valid in every jurisdiction in which you're in. And then, yes, I do have a co-counsel in Georgia. I actually went to college there, played basketball there for, you don't all know this, but I'm very, very short. So despite my height, I played basketball in college, and this woman on my team is a lawyer there, and so she is my co-counsel in Georgia, so we can absolutely work together. And then how do we continue to be engaged, to engage the public and keep them informed and activated? Yeah, I mean, there is going to be, exactly, without the fear of being accused of fear mongering. I was talking to Jen about this last night, just even with my post. I'm like, everyone's so happy. I don't want to be like, wah, wah, you know what I mean? But at the end of the day, and it landed as it was intended, right? And so I really truly think that as long as energetically and our intention is not fear mongering, but actual information and staying informed and clear advice and information on cases and whatnot, then with this information, people can do with what, they will. I remember when marriage equality hit, and especially lesbian couples in their family planning, they did just this fallacy of, well, we're married and we're both on the birth certificate, so we don't need to do anything. But confirmatory adoptions and second parent adoptions are still needed. And so I spent years sort of fighting that fallacy. It wasn't complacency. It was fallacy. Big difference, right? And so if people don't know what they don't know, then that's a fallacy. If they do know that there are things that they should do and they're just choosing not to, then that's complacency. So at this point, we're in an information game, an informing game, and just keep doing things like this and yeah, go from there. Do you have any Yep, we have a co-counsel in Michigan. They're awesome, so we can work with you in Michigan as well. Just reach out. And then for the HVA forms, so this is that HVA form. I knew I had it. So they're travel documents. So this is the one document where I remove the mention of spouse. Okay, because if you're whipping out these cards, clearly you're in a hostile situation. They didn't just let you into the hospital room, right? One of the 1,138 state and federal privileges tied to the institution of marriage is automatic visitation rights to your spouse. If you are not married, like myself, and or you're somewhere where your marriage is not recognized, then you don't have that automatic visitation. So again, I lived in Tanzania for over a year and a half where it's illegal to be LGBTQ. So I know, I don't want to out you by virtue of this card, right? So it's the one place where I remove spouse. And then there's a HIPAA waiver. You never waive your HIPAA rights until you do, even by virtue of marriage. That is sacrosanct. You never waive your HIPAA rights until you do. So ultimately, you're in the room and they have to talk to you, but you have no power. And so it's great to get all this done, but actually having access to your documents if and when you need them is key, right? Most estate planning attorneys only care about and plan for death and disability. Shocker, spoiler alert, we're all going to die. It's going to happen once, and hopefully our big long life, and we will plan for it outside of probate and all the things. We'll talk about that in December, why we want to avoid that, right? But my documents are more around living, how to actually live more seamlessly as a marginalized community in this country. Okay, so actually having access to them, I ask you to upload them to the cloud because you're not going to have the packet of originals in the car accident with you. Okay, so a lot of folks, like the person, from Florida who already have all of their documents, reached out and they're like, we just want these. So we made them available, took a little while, but we were able to make them available as a one-off. So for folks who have everything else, but they don't have this, you can just get that as a one-off. Do you offer a review of an existing estate plan? Yeah, absolutely. And even for my own clients, we do an annual review and every 3 years. So it's called estate planning, ING, because plans are meant to change. That Florida person, when she had those documents drafted, probably at that moment didn't know she'd end up in Maryland right now, right? So you get these documents done, but they're meant to be reviewed consistently, both with your life updates, the law updates, all the things. So yeah, we do that a lot. I'm curious. We got approved. Awesome. And can they cancel our plan? I thought you were saying because you're leaving the country. Because I did a legal Q&A just on how to leave the country and having these international plans. So again, it depends. So at the end of the day, Obergefell is not going anywhere anytime soon. There is not a case before us right now or before the Supreme Court. So that case would have to materialize. Let's just say Kim Davis's case was taken. They would have scheduled oral arguments 4 months from now. Then the opinion would have been issued in June, right? So a lot of advance notice. But as far as, what would happen with health insurance plans, we'll just have to see how things roll out. And then I'm in the military and getting married, regardless of if Obergefell gets overturned. Do you foresee any threat to spousal privileges afforded to military spouses? So again, that is the Respect for Marriage Act, right? So that's the federal piece. And the Respect for Marriage Act said that as long as that the whole federal government has to recognize place of celebration. So as long as you were married somewhere where it is legal and valid, then the federal government will have to recognize your marriage. That is what the Respect for Marriage Act says. And then how, the Trump administration may try to get around that, right? Because that's what it says. That's the rule of law. But we know that they never play by the rules, right? So some of the issues that I could foresee is when Trump declared on Inauguration Day only 2 sexes in this country, male and female, right? Wouldn't it stand to reason that all federal benefits flowing to marriages would only be bestowed upon a marriage made up of a male and a female? Then there are the religious exemptions. Again, we haven't yet litigated the Respect for Marriage Act because Obergefell is a law of the land. So as or if we start getting into that foray, I feel like I'll know more because it'll be less hypothetical. But all to say, the answer should be no, because the Respect for Marriage Act would protect that, given that the military is federal. Yes. Do you work with clients who live out of state? Yep. I have co-counsels in multiple states that I associate with, and then I'm able to work with clients in collaboration with the licensed attorney in that state. But so yeah, just reach out, let me know where you are, and I'll let you know if I have a co-counsel in that state. Yes. So for Pride plans, we did a webinar around Pride plans. So there's working with me through the law firm. And then there's prideplans.com, which, has the same documents ultimately in a self-directed sort of, think of it as a queer legal Zoom, if you will, where you fill out the questionnaire, you do it all on your own. It's just a self-directed, but yes, they are valid in all 50 states. It doesn't matter. It's not a law firm per se. They are documents that we've had using my base queer competent LGBTQ documents. Like, I came up with a definition for spouse post-election to solve for the concern that if in 3 years from now you're not spouses, but we did all of these documents and it says, I appoint my spouse, Angela, but now we're not, do I have to go back and update all of this because of that? So I created a definition that's in all of the documents except for this one that solves for that. That basically, as of the date of execution of the documents in, with the laws in effect in the US at that time, you are legally considered spouses. And that the term spouse is merely a designation. It has no legal significance. What if I said, I appoint the human Angela? I appoint the a-hole Angela, right? Like, it didn't change the fact that you appointed Angela as your agent, but we added a designation prior to that name to further clarify who that person is. We do that with your sister. We do that with friend. We do that with cousin, brother-in-law, mother. So it's just a designation to help clarify, but I added a spousal definition, and that would be in the Pride plans as well. But yes, valid in all 50 states. The only difference is, like I said, it's self-directed. You go through the process alone. So if I changed my name when my wife and I got married in 2013, I have my original birth certificate with my maiden name. Exactly. You would just potentially need to bring all of that documentation. So not everybody has their birth, a lot of folks in rural towns, and they don't even, the process of getting it and who to get it from and all of the things, like it's basically a voter suppression tactic. If they continue to chip away at the rights, won't that impact? Yeah, absolutely. But marginalized families like Sandra Muñoz, right? So yes, marginalized queer families, straight and LGBTQ alike, ultimately, but the ways in which they're using it to whittle away, the majority of the harm falls on marginalized straight families and queer families. Is there a good place for newly diagnosed LGBTQ cancer patients with caregivers to learn what they should set up to ensure that they are protected as possible? Would you be open to being hired to host a webinar on this? Yeah, I mean, I'm open to educating, really LGBTQ folks, especially as we age, right? So this is specific to cancer and needing care, right? But I'm never gonna have kids. My gay husband's never gonna have kids, right? Like, and so then as we age, even if you're partnered, right, and you live your whole lives together, you're together 47 years, and then one of you dies at 89, and then the other one is alone, 89, potentially with dementia, right? Not that kids, there are a lot of straight people out there that don't take care of their parents, or, and LGBTQ folks that have no desire to take care of their parents. So it's not an automatic safety net, but it does expand your network of potential caregivers. Too many people in this country are focused on their financial retirement accounts, right? Whereas their financial, if you will, well-being, and a lot of folks, again, LGBTQ and straight alike, are not concerned about their social network. You need to be just as wealthy with a social network as you age in this country, because our chronological lifespan is longer and longer and longer, but our health span is shorter and shorter and shorter. So great, you live to 91, but you stop being healthy at 61. What happens to you during that 30-year time period? Right? So I'm super, super passionate about that for LGBTQ folks as we age. By 2030, in 5 years, the baby boomer generations will all be 65 plus. Those are the pioneering LGBTQ folks whose shoulders I stand on. Who's taking care of them? And they lost the majority of their social network during the AIDS crisis. Right? So super, super important around either diagnoses and or aging or all of the things. If my partner and I don't own any property yet and we get pride plans now, is there a way to protect future property? Yep. You'll get the trust-based plan now, and it's actually smart to do that. Not enough people do that. Because, so imagine this is your revocable trust. All right. And the water in it are your assets. If you get it now and you don't have property in there, when you go to buy the property, this is the only type of trust that can get a mortgage. You will do so in the name of the trust, and then it'll go in there at closing, and you don't have to pay a title company. If you owned real estate right now, we would have to transfer it in. The water doesn't just get in there. All right. At signing, you got an empty water glass. Whoop-de-doo. Okay. The water didn't just go in there. The most important piece of estate planning is actually funding this thing. So not enough people have it in advance and then buy real estate, and it goes directly in there and you save money that way. So, it is what it is, 6 to 1, half dozen to the other. It's just in the future, if you don't have it, buy real estate, there'll be a cost to getting it in there. But how do you make them realize that we are not truly free? Yeah, don't say gay laws, and I mean everything in between. I know. It's mind numbing. We just, for every legal Q&A, we touch on a different topic. We've talked about the shadow docket and the ways in which the Supreme Court is using the shadow docket to silently take away LGBTQ rights. We've talked about even the Department of Health and Human Service regulations and whistleblower on gender-affirming care physicians, and the CHOP litigation, along with 24 other gender-affirming care hospitals around the country. And in particular, Boston won their subpoena. We're still waiting to hear what's going to happen with Philadelphia's CHOP. But why do they want a list? And then trans folks being called nihilistic extremist terrorists, by the FBI, and creating a list like that. So, and then don't say gay laws, and teachers, basically being worried about being criminally charged as child abusers. There is a lot. There's a lot going on, down to the most recent, right? Anybody who does nonprofit work for LGBTQ folks won't have their federal loans recognized or forgiven, right? Monuments being taken away in our name. There's just, it's a lot. I don't recommend listening to the news too much, and just really taking care of your mental health during all of this. At the end of the day, like I said, we're going to get through this together. I know in my estate planning, we're entering what's called the Great Wealth Transfer. Over $80 trillion is going to transfer hands in the next 20 to 25 years. And again, those elder LGBTQ folks have a lot of it. So I'm working with HRC to do a philanthropic, seminar on LGBTQ folks wielding the money that they have in order to really impact change in the next 20 years. And I am, sort of diverting my, in my estate plan away from legal impact. If you would have told me as a lawyer 17 years ago that I'd be changing, my bequeathing from legal impact organizations to organizations that are helping LGBTQ folks survive, like the Trevor Project, right? So really, we're at a point where we're not going to win many legal battles for the next however long, and so really making sure that from a mental health perspective, we're surviving is super, super key. So that is the HVA that I shrunk down and laminated. Yeah, and if you go through Pride Plans to get it, Tom will email you the exact dimensions to take to Staples. and get it shrunken down and laminated in such a way that it is legible and all of the things. Just got back from our honeymoon, had okay, yeah, thankfully, exactly. And our passport holders, yes. Awesome. Do you and your firm fight for civil rights against government and insurance companies? So, so in general, I don't do any litigation because I travel too much, and just the schedule that I hold and have for things like this. I can't be at the behest of a judge telling me that I need to be somewhere tomorrow at 5 o'clock. It just wouldn't work. But again, I co-counsel with a lot of litigators, and you may have seen my post of working to, in the next year or so, form the first ever nationwide law firm geared solely towards the LGBTQ community for all of our legal needs, right? Not just the ones that have to do with being LGBTQ, not just estate planning or adoptions or name changes, but, and or employment discrimination, but we also slip fall and we go bankrupt and we have DUIs and we just have legal needs. And wouldn't it be great to have a gay lawyer that you could deal with all of those things? And again, being able to competently and safely serve folks all over the country. So I am in the midst of creating said friendly list. Yes. And the LGBTQ bar does have one. Yep. And again, the one that I'm compiling are of the folks that I have personally vetted around the work that I do. But the LGBTQ Bar Association does have a public list of members. And how do I convince my friends that they need to do a second parent adoption? I can send you an article that I wrote, or you could probably Google it, just my name, and birth certificate is not a decree of parentage. And I spell it out as black and white. Other than that, you can only take a horse to water. So, yes, we do work with folks in Atlanta and in Michigan, the HVAs. You said that Tennessee law has, but that was not the Kim Davis case, right? So Tennessee has a law that they enacted a year ago, 2024, saying that judges and clerks can abstain and ultimately delegate. It does say that. So unlike Kim Davis, where they had no other ability to get married, if someone in Tennessee doesn't want to do it, they have to delegate it. So sort of what happened with that Syracuse judge. If we are federally protected with the Respect for Marriage Act, what happens if our state changes its stance, if it's given back to the states? So then that's when the Respect for Marriage Act will begin to be litigated. That's when it will actually do something. Right now, it's one of the only times in U.S. history we enacted a law preemptively. It's been around for going on 3 years and it hasn't done anything because Obergefell is still the law of the land. Okay, so if it goes back to the states, then it pops up. And what it should do is, so if you were married in Tennessee, you may have to then go get married in a blue state and then come back to Tennessee. And then the Respect for Marriage Act says that that then must be recognized. But again, we know then Tennessee will challenge the Respect for Marriage Act. But I don't see them being able to repeal it. I just don't see them having the numbers to repeal the Respect for Marriage Act. Need at least 60 with a filibuster. They have maybe 52. So those are the proper channels. And I don't see them repealing it. So then the question is, seeing as they're always shiny objects, look this way while they're doing that, right? What are all the other ways in which that they could attempt to eviscerate the Respect for Marriage Act? So we could file federal taxes, but not state ones. Right. I mean, that's what happened. We've been there. Right? We've been there where you could file state if you lived in a state, but you couldn't file federal. When we got marriage equality, they allowed us to retroactively go back and amend our tax returns for 3 years because people couldn't, they were filing 2 sets. So it's not like this is, asinine and unheard of. We literally did that for decades. And there is, one of the ways it could potentially roll out is just like we could retroactively go back and amend our tax returns. I envision they could say something like, all right, like let's say Obergefell falls today. You have until 2027 to get your shit together, kind of thing. So you're going to file as is in 25, file as is in 26, and then as of 1/1/27, then no. So just like they retroactively took a bunch of amended returns and dealt with it. I had one client who got $79,000 back, took a trip around the world. It was like, thanks, government. Right. So, I mean, these are serious, again, fiscally significant powers and privileges, rather. Is anything like your definition of spouse needed in a prenup in case of legal changes? So, I do have language in all my prenups, and I'm shocked we got this far and I haven't mentioned prenups. I believe it's the 10th estate planning document. Everybody in this country has a prenup. It's whether or not you would, or postnup. It's whether or not you wrote it or the state in which you live in wrote it. I highly, highly recommend. We've been watching straight people screw up marriage for 400 years. What makes us think we're any different? Okay, so all it is, like, we're gonna be reading something if D-Day happens, right? And it's either something that you two co-created and put in writing, or something, the divorce code in the state in which you live. I have an exhaustive 17-point checklist that I've created overseeing the most ridiculous things people can fight over. Most prenups are woefully deficient. All it says is what's mine is mine, what's yours is yours, what's joint is joint. Okay. Who's moving out? And when? Who's getting the dog? Right? Mine said I keep the chihuahuas. And there's health insurance. So to make sure that nobody weaponizes health insurance on someone, I have health insurance clauses. And so if anyone wants the checklist, more than willing to share that with folks, just reach out, let me know. Again, it's not legal advice, it's merely legal information of whether you're in a polyamorous relationship or an open relationship. And if there are any agreements between the two of you that should be put in there. I just had one where we said no other partner is to move into the marital home. That's not even a request. Right? So it's just super, super specific to everyone. Yeah, a lot of folks don't realize it happened during the Biden administration, the Muñoz. Or no, it wasn't Biden. Was it Biden or Obama? I forget. It was, but either way, it was not this administration. As a single gay man with no trustworthy family, I'm very interested in legal process to protect myself, my assets, my retirement, my inheritance, especially from my natural family intervening. Yeah, absolutely. Again, everybody needs these documents, right? With married folks, there's that one freebie that if you have no documents, everything goes to the spouse. That's why a lot of straight people don't have this, right? We're just more aware of needing it because we've only been allowed to get married for the last 10 years, right? But so as a single person in the world, you absolutely need to have everything in writing, or else everything would go up to either parent if they're alive, kids if you have them, parent if they're alive, then your siblings, and not at all your chosen family, your charities, your loved ones. They would absolutely not be a thing. So super, super helpful. And yeah, I will absolutely do a webinar specific. A lot of people think that because I talk about estate planning while I'm talking about the marriage recreation and the marriage protection that it provides, that in some way that means estate planning is just for married folks. Absolutely not. Right. And so doing a webinar just around estate planning for single folks, absolutely. Made for us by us. Yeah. Thank you for doing this. Yes. And so for Atlanta, Georgia, I'd be that queer estate planning attorney for you. And actually, and my Georgia person actually lives in Kentucky, so I don't know of a counterpart to me that lives in Georgia if you wanted to physically go to someone. But even with all of my estate planning, even if you were 5 blocks away from me in Philadelphia, we all meet via Zoom, except for the when we actually go to sign the documents, and in which case for my remote clients, we have a whole process about how we effectuate the signing. I just lost the chat. Well, we have 5 minutes. Let me see if there's one more. If they overturn, yeah, not so much of a question. Is there something similar to a prenup for adopted kids? No. Well, in what sense? I don't know. So with kids and in marriage, you can't designate custody prior to the divorce. So a prenup is about the legal financial things of you, but you can't negotiate in advance human lives and what's going to happen. And so unfortunately, I have one client who did their prenup with me, had a very easy 5,000 uncontested divorce, wham bam, done in 7 months, and a six-figure 12-year custody battle. So there is no way, unfortunately, to prevent that. All right, let's try to end on a happy one, not that one. I was like, don't. um, uh, let's see. Well, you can plan for your pets, right? So very, very important. One of the most important documents is what would happen to the pets if anything were to happen to you. I like to know your vet. There we go. Everyone who has a pet nearby, put the pet to, oh, Jay, I see Melinda. And so what would happen to you two? Oh, Kathleen. um, there we go. It's blurry, but I'm sure that it's super cute. So I'd like to know who your vet is, right? There it is. So that we can make a phone call and know that your dog is 8 and gets UTIs and all of the things. Like, you have no idea how many times over the years I've called around pretending to be my deceased client. Like, oh, I'm looking for, Baxter's records. My number is, and like, we don't have a Baxter here. I'm like, oh, sorry. Next vet. Nope. And then finally, yeah, hey, Frida. And I'm like, oh, good. Fax me. So knowing where we can get the records and then an amount for their care with this document, pet insurance is transferable. And then obviously who your person would be. So super, super important. So again, I'm not sure what the topic will be for 2 weeks from now. For the next legal Q&A, could be a live interview with Sandra Muñoz and her legal analysis of this theory. I'll find out more after I actually connect with her real time, if she's even open to that. She may not be a fan of interviews and publicity and all of the things, given probably what she already went through being a named plaintiff in a Supreme Court case. So, but either way, I will report back and then we'll email out what the specific agenda will be for November 25th. And then, Jen, will you capture all these questions that are coming in last minute? Yeah, we'll capture all of these, and if there's anything that I didn't already address, I'll also email that out. Let me know if you want the prenup checklist. Email me any questions. Email me if there's a topic that you want to talk about, because ultimately this is for you. And then we'll go from there. All right. Happy Tuesday, everyone. They're better than Tuesdays. High five. Bye, guys.